Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well. And we have an honored guest here. We've interviewed several times over the years. Thank you, Dr. Jerry Bergman, for coming on the show again. We appreciate you very much.
It's great to be on.
Tonight we're going to be talking about Jerry Bergman's new book. It's called The Methodist Darwin Syndrome. Now, Jerry's written about 60 books, so this is number 60 or something like that.
It's amazing.
We are really amazed at the productivity you've done in terms of churning out information about the creation-evolution issue. And this is one of the latest issues that you are trying to address, is that we have the Darwin issue that we deal with, and it's really unscientific in the way it.
Well, what's so surprising, Doug, is, and Jerry brings this out so well, is how quickly and how completely many people who you think would be on the creation side of the issue have gone to the dark side. They've gone to the evolution side of the arguments and compromised with it. This book, The Methodist Darwin Syndrome, is really quite interesting. I've been reading it today, trying to catch up. Last time we were talking about it, I hadn't read it, and it's as all your books are, well documented, well footnoted, and that kind of stuff. But I've always been amazed at how the church, which should not be on the side of evolution, so often comes down even harder. The theistic people seem to come down harder against creation than the scientists do many times, and this is always surprising to me. Not that there aren't atheistic scientists who are strong polemicists for evolution, but you expect that. But what you don't expect to see it is in the hierarchy of church people and upper church people, especially when you get, as you point out in this book, that much of the laity, if you will, in the Methodist Church are by and large more creation minded, where the upper echelon is more Darwinian in their thinking. You point that out quite effectively, I thought. And why don't you talk a little bit about that, I guess? Or I mean, we talk about the unscientific nature of Darwinism. That's how your book starts out, really. And you've actually believed, which we haven't said over the years, that evolution has been falsified, which is kind of a neat premise.
Yeah, the problem is that the church is too influenced by the culture. And we can see this over and over, not just in this area, but other areas. They tend to go along with the culture, which is not a problem necessarily, but sometimes it is. In this case, it is. And the Methodist Church has been very influenced by the culture. And of course, the best examples are at least many Methodists accepted slavery. In fact, the church split over the slavery idea. Right. And now, of course, they regret it, but they also later on accepted eugenics, that some races were superior to other races and that we can breed better people. And they accepted that very aggressively in some cases. In fact, many Methodist ministers became aggressive supporters speaking around the country about that idea. And now they've apologized for good reason for supporting eugenics because, of course, we realize it's wrong. That indeed, as the Bible says, we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, and therefore we're all equal. Some of us are not superior in genetic ways than other people. But unfortunately, the worst, I think, acceptance is, and I document this in my book, is the acceptance of Darwinism. Darwinism has not only overwhelming evidence against it, but it's problematic from the scientific viewpoint. I just watched on Discovery Channel a show about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And after this surprised me. And I know a lot about World War II, but when I saw this film on History Channel, it surprised me. But they pointed out that weeks after they bombed the city, the American scientists went over there to study the effects of the bomb on the people. And they mentioned that the Japanese were very cooperative, and surprised me if Japan bombed Detroit, I'm not sure I would welcome any of the people who bombed it to come in Detroit to check out the city, but they did. And this, I think, says a lot about war, who causes war and who leads and is behind the war. It wasn't the people, by and large. Anyways, they did a lot of studies, and they found indeed that there was a upsurge in leukemia and other diseases, cancers especially, as a result of the exposure to the people to the radiation. And of course, we know now that that's true. And of course, evolution, ironically, says the key to genetic variation is mutations caused by, for example, radioactivity. And so according to evolution, you are the result of high levels of radiation causing a large number of mutations. And so you are a result of mistakes, damage to the genome called mutations. And this is the basis of the theory. It's not a minor point, it's the central idea. So once you show indeed that you cannot get new genetic variety, at least significant new genetic variety, you get damage, of course, from mutations, the theory is gone. Now, there are many other evidences against the theory, but that's one of the major points that you can see everywhere. I worked when I was at the medical school doing research. I worked in the area of mutations and cancer. And when I would mention something like, well, do we have any evidence of beneficial mutations? And they would look at me like, are you okay? You've been working too hard. You need a break. What do you mean beneficial mutations? They almost invariably cause harm. And that was well respected, well known. In fact, it's so well known that if you knew there was a source of radiation like radon in your house, you would try to deal with it. You wouldn't say, oh, good, we have radon in the house. Maybe that'll cause mutations and maybe we'll have an Einstein IQ genius child as a result of this. Well, you know that's not going to happen. You know that mutations are harmful. And so that's the basis of evolution, and that is worse, more ludicrous than the basis for eugenics and slavery. At least there was some, we of course have shown this wrong today, but there was some apparent evidence for eugenics as well as for slavery. And today we know there's simply no evidence for evolution. And when I talk about evolution, I'm not talking about breeding dogs. I'm talking about we start out with nothing, as I show in the first chapter of my book, right, and we end up with everything. So literally from nothing to everything by chance. That's evolution. Now, some argue, well, it wasn't nothing in the beginning. It was a small molecule about the size of a hydrogen atom. But where did that come from? Well, we don't know. We're still working on that. When you bring up these concerns, evolutionists say, well, we don't know. We haven't figured this out yet, but we'll figure it out. And it's kind of a stopgap. You realize that, and they realize that there are problems. You mentioned earlier, the laity are more apt in some ways to accept Darwinism because they don't know the problems. But professional biologists know the problems, and therefore, in some cases, they're more critical of evolution because they know the problems it has, and they know that science doesn't, in the long run, support it. But they believe, well, we'll figure it out. They can't accept the other idea, which is, of course, God.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about what Wesley meant to the Methodist Church. He was really the founder of Methodism, and his preaching in England and in America, I think, had a transforming effect upon both countries in many respects.
Also, Whitfield. I think Whitfield's very important. Early founder in Methodism. I think
Wesley was really important.
Yes.
He, in many ways, brought Christianity to America. The Episcopalian Church, of course, dominated while the British ruled. But when, after the Revolution, not only the soldiers left, but many of the Episcopalian pastors and leaders left as a result, there was a void in America. And that void was filled very effectively by the Methodist Church. In fact, the Methodist Church was one of the largest denominations in America for many, many years. And just recently, of course, it's declining in numbers, at least in America. It's growing, I understand, in other countries like Vietnam and Africa and so on.
Probably where they hold on to the purity of Wesley's teachings as opposed to the compromises that the leadership seems to be engaging in right now, you know?
They do, and that's partially one reason why they are growing.
Yep.
What do you think is the reason why the Methodist Church hierarchy ends up embracing Darwinism almost to the point where they exclude it, creation teaching altogether in their and get rid of it in their conferences? They don't allow teaching in the conferences. Why do you think that is the case?
I think they're trying to be acceptable in the world. They're trying to basically say, we're educated, we're good people, And also major influence is the colleges. Most, and I know not all, but most Methodist colleges in the science department teach evolution as fact. And they teach all this information, which we know has been refuted, like the vestigial organ argument, that we have 100 organs that have no function, or at least have a less function than they did in the past. So they teach all these ideas, and that's because, of course, the professors in most Methodist colleges were trained at secular universities and were trained in evolution, and therefore they are only aware of this side. One big difference you notice is that evolution is based on belief. They really believe it, and they believe it sincerely, and therefore evidence does not do much to persuade them against this worldview. On the other hand, many creationists were, like myself, were evolutionists, and I became such through study of evolution. So if you study the science objectively without those blinders on, the evolution blinders, the evidence is clearly in support of a creation worldview and not in support of evolution. In fact, I have a whole book which I document, indeed, many cases of well-known scientists who were evolutionists and became creationists as a result of their study of science. And they bring this out very persuasively in their writings. And I, of course, simply review this in my book called Science is the Doorway to Theism.
So Darwinism, and we've said this many times, is basically a belief system, even more so than it's a secular religion as opposed to a theistic religion, but they have a faith in it. You also brought up the point, this is something I've been astounded at, is part of it's the culture, but it's also there's the pride in their own education, their own knowledge. They think, I've always felt that many times people in the upper echelons of academia, if they believe in a biblical worldview whatsoever, they're not given the kudos or the respect that you will if you're an atheist or if you're an agnostic. You're basically not giving any kind of respect, and that goes a long way to undermining any kind of real, I would say, doctrinal biblical veracity. You just don't get that at higher levels many times. Do you think that's true?
Oh yeah, you mentioned that evolution is a religion. Well, it's technically a worldview. And evolution explains where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. Religion, Christianity, and the other theistic religions explain the same thing. Where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. So the basic questions both worldviews, evolution and theism, explain. And therefore, they compete with each other. And that's why evolutionists are so emotional when you try to talk to them. I've tried over and over to converse with evolutionists, and they end up name calling. You're stupid, you're an idiot, you're a Nazi, you're a racist, etc.
You have to use ad hominem when you get them, actually. But do you find more difficulty with the theological or the theologians or the scientists, or are they about equal as far as difficulty in debating?
Well, it's about equal in many ways, except many of the biologists, though, realize the problems. And many anatomists realize there are no vestigial organs. I've taught anatomy for 30 years, and the books are very clear that I've used many different anatomy books. And if you look up the word vestigial in the book, it's not there. If you look up appendix, it doesn't mention any ideas about vestigiality. It points out they have a number of functions. And so there's no claims in the anatomy books for the vestigial organ idea. So I would hope that most anatomists would have dismissed this quite a few years ago, because just not there, the evidence. But unfortunately, you look at the biology books, and they claim that indeed we have all these vestigial organs, and they list the wisdom teeth and the appendix and the thyroid and the thymus gland and a bunch of other organs.
So the textbooks are about 30 years or 40 years out of date, probably, right?
Well, they are, but Stephen A. Gould did a really good article on the problem of biology books, and he brought out most biology books are written by professors of biology who used their own biology book when they were in college as a basis for writing the book. And most biology professors are not experts in all areas, and therefore they tend to rely upon what they learned in college. And so these ideas are repeated over and over and over. And Gould did a real good job showing this.
But they're not still repeating, let's say, the Haeckel drawings, are they? I know that was. I mean, after it had been proven a fraud, what, 100 years ago? I don't know, a long time ago. And they were still using the Ernst Haeckel arguments. I grew up reading about that in the 60s, you know? And I'm going, they're not still using that are they? Are they?
Remnants of that are still used. They may not use Haeckel's drawings, though. Some do use Haeckel's drawings, but some claim that, well, the argument is good and they don't quote Haeckel necessarily, but they indeed do accept it. So yeah, that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is still part of the biology textbooks, or at least many. And so it takes a long time to get these ideas out of the books. As Gould brought out, did an excellent job bringing out. He did a study on how ideas got in the biology books 100 years ago. And many of them are still in the books and they're still wrong. And that was the source of Gould's article, which so much of what he wrote, Creationists We Just Feel, is so good. And that article, I just thought that could have been written by a creationist. I wouldn't change one word. But of course, he wasn't trying to defend creationists, but he was trying to show, indeed, the inequities of a lot of biology textbooks, college biology textbooks.
I want to talk a little bit about the slavery issue. When the church compromised on that, was that about the time of Darwin, or was it before that, or was it afterward? And was the justification that used for it based upon age of the earth issues and perhaps a pre-Adamite race idea?
Yeah, well, a lot of the justification was indeed that blacks are an inferior race. And of course, there's a problem with that idea in Christianity. And as you were mentioning, the well-known Methodist who became a geologist and actually taught at the University of Michigan, he had to develop this idea called the pre-Adamite men. And how he got around the scriptures was basically, he said that there was a group of pre-Adamite men created first, but they're animals. And that Caucasians were created later, and Caucasians were descendants of Adam and Eve. And the pre-Adamite, he has in the book I mentioned, in my book, on page 72, but he has Alexander Winchell had in his pre-Adamic book, he had the pre-Adamic people, which he included not just Negroes, which he has a picture of, but also Mongoloids, Davadians, Hottentots, Eskimos, and Papuans, people from South Asia.
Oh, Papua New Guinea, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, New Guinea and so on. And Australians, by the way. So these are all pre-Adamites. They're all inferior. And therefore that was believed by many people that slavery was a way of taking care of this inferior race. It's like taking care of your animals, your dogs, your horse. I mean, you don't want to give your horses freedom, independence, you take care of them. And your slaves, likewise, you take care of them. And so they thought this arrangement was biblical, and they thought it was okay. Now, of course, a lot of people did not accept the pre-Adamic idea, but nonetheless, they still accepted the idea of blacks were inferior in many ways, and this they felt was a result of evolution and of time and so on.
Well, I know I just recently talked to a lady at church, and she thought Cain married somebody, there were other people created, and I go, I couldn't believe that somebody still believed that today. And she's actually pretty good as far as, for most things, as far as theologically speaking. But I go, Cain married his sister or some close personal relative descended from Adam and Eve. And I said, it's very clear that, I said, well, she went over to this land of Nod and found a wife over there. I said, no, that's not what it says. And I had this big debate with her, and I just couldn't believe that whole idea still persists when the scripture is so clear that from one blood all the nations of the earth have arisen, and all the fall, everyone is cursed because of the fall of Adam and Eve. Does that mean the Negroes would not be cursed, and they're not under the fall? They can't be redeemed. You mentioned that in your book that people had problems because they realized that Negroes would not be able to be redeemed. There's no redemption for them, but to me, you have death and dying and suffering before Adam and Eve. You're really in a lot of trouble because you've negated the gospel. There's no need for Christ Jesus to come if there was no fall in the first place, or if the fall is irrelevant to all of creation except for Caucasians.
There's the history of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, and he was a Roman historian. And his book, The History of the Jews, you're probably aware of that,
Yes.
in so many ways follows the Bible, except it gives a lot more information. Now, we don't accept that as inspired, but it gives a lot of more information. And we know that Adam and Eve had a lot of kids and a lot of children, and their children had a lot of children. So my guess is that when they left and married their sister, and they may not have even met their sister because they moved long distances away and began setting up their own cities and so on, and could have gone back and met their sister and then married her. So this wasn't somebody necessarily they grew up with, or they may have known about her when she was 3, 4, and 5, but when they went back and met her when she was 18, 19, 20, and so on, that it would be like a stranger and it would not be somebody they grew up with. So we talk a lot about marrying one's sister. Of course, today that's wrong because of genetics. We know that mutations are more common in a family because of the inheritance factor. But back then, of course, Adam and Eve had no mutations, 0. And so their offspring would have very few mutations. And so therefore, that would not have been a problem. In fact, marrying your sister was approved until much later when the mutation load developed to the point where indeed this would be a problem. Marrying your sister, you have the same mutation and therefore all kinds of diseases.
Yeah, actually the Levitical laws, when it first became proscribed, and up until that time, it's like, look, Lot had children from his own daughters. That was really, and there was no, we get shocked about that, but the Ammonites and the Moabites came out of it, of which Jesus was a descendant of a Moabitess.
You had the same problem at the time of Noah and...
genetic bottleneck, yeah.
And so that would have... and really, you notice that the ages in the Bible of the patriarchs dramatically did descend after the flood versus they were nearly all 900 years old when they died in the time of Adam and Eve.
Well, I actually put it to the evolutionists. I said, you may think I'm a knucklehead for believing a literal man and woman created all the human beings, but I said, you believe from a couple of ape-like hominids, 2 people come across. How come we're not extinct 300 times over? And so what you were saying about the genetic purity, if you will, there was actually, it was richer, I would say. Not purity is probably a bad word because it speaks of trying to purity of the race. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actually has more variety built into the genome, probably of some form or another, and a lot of that's either been lost or mutated since then, and so we can't do those type of things. But yeah, I tell myself, how come from 2 ape-like hominids, even if I allowed you a male and a female to arrive at the same time, which is stretching credibility to a huge degree, then how come we're not extinct? Because we would have been inbreeding all those years with common modern day genetic. The present is the key to the past. We would have issues, it would seem to me, unless there's been genetic, and we know there's genetic load and genetic breakdown we've documented it over the years, and so mutation does not help.
Load is increasing each generation now, more so than back then. The feeling is that the atmosphere then was protective of cosmic radiation. And now the perception is that the atmospheric conditions have changed to a degree where we end up with a more cosmic radiation and thus more mutations, and thus we end up with a higher mutational load with each generation. About 100, the estimate is 100 new mutations for each generation. So your children have 100 more mutations than you do, and then your grandchildren have 100 more yet new mutations compared to you. So you can see the load is increasing pretty rapidly in our world. But way back in Adam and Eve's time, and Noah's time, as far as we know, there was no evidence of that mutational load increasing that rapidly.
Now, have you had any issues in presenting your ideas in the Methodist Church?
No, I've surveyed, in fact, my book has a chapter on this. I've surveyed Methodist lay people, and I found the vast majority are creationists. In fact, the pastors I've had in my church, we've had about 7 pastors, I think. I started attending that church when I married my wife 36 years ago. So we've had, I think, about 7 pastors. But among these pastors, as far as I'm aware, all were creationists. So it's not at the pastoral level. It tends to be at the higher level, the bishops and the leaders of the church is where the problem tends to be.
So that has not trickled down yet at this point in time. Do you foresee that that's going to happen, though? I mean, what can you do to stop that, to stem the tide? Because usually
That's why I wrote my book, and I hope my book gets out there, and a lot of Methodists buy it. I imagine Methodists would be the main people who'd be interested in this book. But there is in the Methodist Church now a lot of turmoil over sexual issues, especially, and therefore a lot are interested in these issues. And therefore, I hope, and I have contact with a number of Methodists who are trying to deal with these issues in the church, trying to make sure they keep their biblical roots. And so as soon as the book comes out, I'll be sending copies to them, and I hope they support it and indeed realize that this is really the core issue. For if you accepted we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, and God created them male and female, so much of these issues today, which are at issue, would not exist, like this idea that people can be one body and one person. I can have a male body and a female person. So I'm a female stuck in the wrong body. And this now is a movement which is growing enormously. There are used to be like 0.001% claim to be transgendered. Now it's like 1 or 2%. So we're talking about several 1,000% increase in the number. And that is a problem in the Methodist as well as other churches. I don't deal with that in my book, but if you think about it, if we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, there were male and female, and that's it. There was no third sex. There was no fourth sex. There was no 20 genders, as some people claim today. There are 20 different genders. There's only 2 genders, male and female, and that's it.
So we're glad that you have written this book, because I think this not only applies to the Methodist Church, but to a lot of the denominations nowadays. I think there's compromises in the leadership of most of the churches, even the evangelical churches that most of us attend. There is doubts that are being given about whether to teach creation or not, and there is this pressure for people to compromise with evolution, and it's mostly at the university level where the kids get this and they don't get taught in the church, and so they get confused.
Well, Jerry, we got about a minute left. Any last thought you'd like to leave us with here on this show about what you'd like to say?
Yeah, the literature at my church, published by Methodist publishing houses, it's all very good, excellent. In fact, I have a whole chapter where I quote the literature and what they actually teach. And so the kids learn in church one worldview, they go to college and they learn another worldview, and then they get confused, or they become accepted because their professor knows a lot about biology, but my pastor doesn't know anything about biology. And so they're convinced by the authority of the universities, and some don't attend Sunday school regularly, and therefore they're not aware of this literature. But it's there. I quote quite a bit in my book that indeed that the teachings in the literature the Methodist Church produces for the Sunday school, all of it that I've seen is very well done. Not a problem.
Good. Well, hope you enjoyed our show tonight. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.